Right now, we're knee-deep into Season 3 of My Hero Academia, and the show is bigger than ever at this point. Right now, our heroes are dealing with probably the biggest threat that they've ever faced. Oh, and before we go any further, this video is gonna have some spoilers for this season of the anime, as well as some small manga spoilers down the line. Alright, so with that out of the way, we can discuss how the students of UA just can't seem to catch a break. In just one semester, they've already had to deal with villains attacking them unexpectedly at the unforeseen simulation joint. They've had the intense sports festival. They were then shoved into unpaid internships. Keeners like Deku, Tenya, and Todoroki had an actual life or death confrontation with one of the most dangerous villains out there. And then after all of that, they still had to deal with final exams. God, and I couldn't even be bothered to open my math textbooks when I was in high school. Well, look, at least it's summer now and they're at a relaxing training camp and they've just been invaded by an elite task force of villains, just like at the USJ. But with all of these unprecedented ambushes that UA keeps dealing with, an obvious question presents itself. How is the League of Villains so smoothly infiltrating the school? Someone's gotta be an informant here. Someone's gotta be letting the League know what's up. I'm Jacob with Channel Frederator, and today we'll see if we can't unearth this supposed mole. These goggles are too delicate and not well made enough, so I'm gonna take them off. Nobody use your quirks, alright? The activities of UA are said to be pretty tightly guarded. Their relationship with the media isn't the most amicable, and it's been said multiple times in the show that the school schedule is known only to the staff in order to avoid intervention from outsiders. How's that been working out again? Right. So, how does this keep happening? Well, it's explicitly said in the latest episode and later in chapter 98 of the manga by UA staff that there must be a traitor among the characters we're already familiar with. And oh boy, you know what that means. Everybody's a suspect. Let's first establish everything we know about the traitor as well as the League of Villains and their goals, and then we'll go through our suspects. So as of right now, since we know so little about the traitor other than that there probably is one, we're going to be making some assumptions that I totally concede could be wrong. Namely that A, the traitor is probably reporting to Shigaraki as opposed to going above his head like to All for One, and that B, they've probably been a traitor since the very beginning of the series before that whole mess at the USJ. Tomura Shigaraki's grown quite a bit, but at the beginning of the series his ethos for being a villain was pretty vague, even to himself. So unclear, in fact, that he and Stain came to blows since Shigaraki's original reasoning of basically killing anyone you don't like was nonsensical to someone who doesn't care for needless bloodshed like Stain. Yes, that is one of his core tenets. Since then, Shigaraki's found his footing and now strives to show society just how fragile it is without its symbol of peace. And his philosophy is that heroes are ultimately dangerous since they make society more apathetic as they wait around for heroes to save the day. An outlook that he likely always held but didn't know how to act upon until recently. And this is generally held up against other villains' mantras like Stain, who believes that heroes are false idols who only care about their bottom line. Write this down, this will be on the test. So what about the other circumstances surrounding the traitor? Well, we know that during the incident at USJ, all communications were down, making outside contact impossible, short of sending someone in person like Tenya. And based on the info they had, the villains were under the impression that All Might would be there, so that they could kill him. But this is something that both 13 and Aizawa knew wasn't true, so that effectively eliminates them from being suspects, though they were never really under suspicion anyway. After the USJ, the other big info leak that came to the League was during the summer training camp. This camp intentionally took place somewhere that was only known to a select few staff members in order to keep it a secret from villains. Again, how did that work out? This would naturally imply that the traitor is a member of UA staff, and Nezu's assumption that it's a student in the manga is a false one. But since this is a show about people with varying superpowers, we also need to ask the question, which of the students could relay their location or otherwise gain this info? So as is tradition, we have like a million suspects and very little information to go on, so let's get to it. We're gonna work our way through Class 1A, but there are theories about literally everyone, so we're gonna have a bit of a lightning round to get rid of as many Class 1A people as we can, and then we're gonna assign plausibility ratings to everybody left. Keep in mind though that this is an overview, so we don't really have time today to get into every single piece of evidence for every single character, but with that in mind, let's go. Firstly, right away, Izuku's the protagonist. He's out. The League captured Bakugo to try to recruit him. He's out. Tenya and Todoroki have both played pivotal roles in several arcs. We've also heard their internal monologues several times about their philosophies and their interpretation of what it means to be a true hero, so they're out too. On the opposite side of the spectrum, it probably wouldn't be somebody that we know almost nothing about, or somebody who's had very little screen time. The show does thankfully give everybody their time in the spotlight now and then, but for the reveal to be impactful, it would have to be somebody that we've established a connection with. We would have to feel betrayed. And if it turned out to be somebody like Ojiro, Koda, Sato, or Sero, we probably wouldn't be all that heartbroken. We'd probably just be like, oh. Of who we've got left, frankly, they're all suspects. But we're gonna eliminate some of them because as I was writing this, I had to actually stop myself from writing a 1-hour video. So we're gonna eliminate Jiro and Mina because there isn't a whole lot to talk about there yet. Kirishima, mostly because of his actions in the latest episode, as well as Tokoyami and Mineta. Tokoyami because A, Mr. Compress went after him during the training camp, and B, because he's too difficult to control, and Mineta because he is just the worst. And revealing him to be the traitor would probably have the opposite effect that would be intended. Of everyone left, we know that Momo is capable of creating tracking devices. It would allow her to broadcast her position no matter where she was. This is by far the biggest piece of evidence against her though, because pretty much everything else is speculation. And unless she's very deep undercover, her tagging one of the vanguards and the events that follow would probably absolve her of any suspicion. So I'd rate the plausibility of Momo Yaoyorozu being the traitor like 1 Matryoshka doll out of 5. There's also rumblings of Tsuyu being the traitor, but really the only piece of evidence is her acting evasive one time further in the manga where she doesn't show the rest of the classmates her dorm room. And it's revealed later in that chapter that she was working through some personal demons at the time, so I don't feel confident saying that she's the traitor either. 0.5 goggles out of 5. No, I'm not biased because she's my favorite, shut up. Next, Aoyama. A few months ago, he shot up to the top of a bunch of people's lists of being the possible traitor. Once again, some small manga spoilers here, so head over to this timestamp if you want to move on to the next suspect. The suspicion of Aoyama was mostly because of one panel at the end of chapter 167 of the manga where we see him watching Izuku sleep from outside. The text in that last panel isn't all that comforting either, since it alludes to his true nature finally coming out. But this was back in January, and the next chapter of the manga pretty much clears him of this creepy factor. Okay, yeah, it's still an incredibly creepy thing to do, but the reason he did it was revealed to be pretty well-meaning and not very traitor-like at all. Not to mention that he eventually attacked Compress to save Tokoyami and Bakugo when he could have just as easily not engaged with the villains at all. So while he may have been the frontrunner as the traitor for a small window of time, I think we can confidently cross him off the list with 0.5 twinkles out of 5. Next, we've got Toru, whose movements are a little difficult to keep track of for obvious reasons. But on top of being invisible, which would be a super useful skill set for eavesdropping on sensitive info or other infiltration tactics, the full scope of her quirk is unknown since we don't know if she can turn her invisibility on or off. We assume that she's just invisible all of the time, but for all we know, she could just be using her invisibility as a disguise. She also seemed noticeably absent at the USJ incident. She claims she was stuck in the landslide zone with Todoroki, but we didn't really see her fight or speak, making her alibi pretty weak. Not to mention that on this map of the USJ from the manga, her whereabouts are listed as unknown. No one knew where Aoyama was either, but it's a secret. One more quick point, on the day the student council president was elected, it's shown in the manga that there's one less vote than the amount of students in the class. Assuming that everybody in the class voted for themselves, and based on the analysis of the votes, it's clear that Toru abstained from the vote. Todoroki's name was also absent from the board, but we know that he voted for Momo because he was there, here he is. But this means that Toru probably wasn't in the room at the time. This was also the day of the media frenzy that caused the panic before the USJ incident that allowed the villains to retrieve the info about the class to be held there. So Toru's supposed absence is a huge point here. Also, remember the end of season 2? That incredibly uncomfortable meeting between Shigaraki and Izuku at the mall? Now, who was it that suggested they all go to the mall again? Wipe that grin off your face, you're on trial here. Based on everyone we've looked at so far, this is some pretty damning evidence. Unless she can find her way out of that hole, I'd have to rate the likelihood of Toru being the traitor 3.5 Torus out of 5. You get it? There's nothing there, because she's invisible. Oh, fine. 3.5 gloves out of 5. Now, let's talk about Shoji for a bit. While he was attacked during the training camp arc, it was in a way that wasn't debilitating. He says himself that his duple arms can duplicate themselves and effectively grow back, and that is exactly what Moonfish severed. But that In the end, meaningless attack sure did get the job done in getting Dark Shadow to flip out and derail the entire training camp's defense efforts. Furthermore, particular care is put into the names of all of these characters, and Mezzo Shoji's name is apparently a reference to this Japanese proverb, which translates roughly to walls have ears, shoji have eyes. Shoji being those sliding wooden and paper doors associated with Japanese architecture. It's possible that his name could just be a reference to his quirk, how he's able to hear exceptionally well and see more than most other people. But could there possibly be a more duplicitous meaning to these words? His quirk would allow him to hear people from awfully far away or even in different rooms discussing guarded info. And to be fair, Jiro would also have this ability to hear people through walls, but we can't talk about every single person today. I'm saying that more to myself right now than I am to anybody else. Furthermore, we later see in the manga that when Shoji moves into his dorm, he doesn't put anything in it, claiming to be minimalist. But you know, maybe it's just so that he doesn't leave a trace. Okay, that last point might have been a bit of a stretch, but I'm liking Shoji for this the more I think about it. So on the plausibility meter, I would rate his likelihood of being the traitor 3 Duplimouths out of 5. Now, what about the theory that Uraraka's the traitor? I know this isn't the most popular choice, and really the only reason she's here is because it would be the most devastating reveal, but come on, wouldn't that hurt so much if the first friend Deku ever made at UA turned out to be a double-crosser? But outside of this meta reasoning, is there anything in-universe we can look at? Well, her motivation for being a hero is a sticking point for a lot of people. She says herself that she's very blatantly in it for the money. It's money so that she can give her parents a comfortable life, yes, but money all the same. And while this outlook may be in direct contrast to villains like Stain, who believe that any heroism done for financial gain is inherently a self-serving act, if she were revealed to be a villain, this would recontextualize things. If she were being paid by Shigaraki, that would help both his point and Stain's. Shigaraki's point that society is far more fragile than we think would be proven by his ability to rip a glimmer of hope from people's lives, namely Ochako's sweet, innocent demeanor, and Stain's point would be proven because, assuming Ochako's backstory about wanting to provide for her parents is true, it would prove that everyone has their price and that true altruism is much rarer than we think. That said, we have heard her internal monologue before. She seems to genuinely look up to Deku, she seems earnest in her hero motivation, and while her character was being conceptualized, steps were taken to ensure that she didn't become too dark of a character. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we could talk about, but we gotta crawl out of this rabbit hole eventually. All told, I'd say that her plausibility for being the traitor is at 2 balls hurled into space out of 5. After all, unlike most of the people we've already talked about, we don't know how she would be able to retrieve classified info to leak in the first place. Out of one rabbit hole and into another, let's talk about arguably the most well-known traitor theory, that of Denki Kaminari. Firstly, if anybody is going to be able to give off their position, it's Kaminari. The electrical impulses he gives off would make him, as every version of this theory calls it, a walking GPS. Not to mention, he's able to communicate with others remotely, as Aizawa commands him to contact others outside the USJ. But of course, he couldn't. He was too busy jamming the signal. We assume that it was one of the villains doing this, but it's just as plausible that our traitor was the one that was sealing off all communication. People are also quick to mention that his original concept art made him seem much more villainous before becoming the doofy Class 1A member that we all know and love. On top of this, there are claims that Kaminari may have planned for the training camp arc way ahead of time, failing the final exam on purpose so that he would be stuck in the remedial lessons during the invasion, meaning that he wouldn't have to fight. People have also mentioned that his claim in episode 20 of season 2 that Stain's demeanor seemed kinda cool is suspect, but we also see later in the final episode of the season that stores are selling Stain merch, and 2 kids even comment on how cool it looks, so this doesn't seem to be too out there of an opinion. That's not the only problem with this idea though. While it's true that he may have maintained his supposed cover during the training camp, he also kicked the asses of like a bunch of dudes at the USJ, which seems to contradict this idea. And while we're talking about the training camp, it was the understanding of the students that anyone who bombed the final exam wouldn't go to the camp at all, so if he had to be at the camp to send out his location, this plan would have completely failed if he wasn't able to go in the first place. And finally, yeah, his original concept art was kinda scary, but Jesus, have you seen Deku's original design? He's terrifying! There's some more small stuff we glossed over, but since he's been around since the very beginning and we still know shockingly little about him, I would put Kaminari's likelihood as the traitor at 3 faces out of 5. Okay, so we've exhausted Class 1A, but we're not quite done yet. There are a bunch more suspects we could get into, but we're only going to talk about one more today, and in my opinion, they're a pretty likely culprit. It may be a little bit out of left field, but I think that a good guess is Vlad King, the homeroom teacher of Class 1B. Being a faculty member, he would know the school schedule as well as which teachers were supposed to be where, making the USJ tip-off possible. He spent most of the training camp invasion inside, away from the action. And finally, every time the League of Villains has infiltrated UA, Class 1A has been in the center of it. Sure, Class 1B was also involved in the training camp arc, but since Bakugo was their primary target and subsequently captured, Aizawa would clearly be slammed with way more bad press than Vlad King. After all, this isn't the first time Aizawa's classes found themselves in the middle of an invasion. They were already dealing with fallout from the USJ incident. At that point, Vlad King just having all of his students accounted for would be seen as a win. And it would convince people that he's a better educator and probably a better hero than Eraserhead. Of course, there are a couple problems with this theory. First of all, he hasn't had a whole lot of screen time, and second of all, he might be a little too peripheral to the main cast to be considered the traitor. But at the same time, as a faculty member in charge of a different class, he wouldn't have a whole lot of opportunities to affect Deku's story just yet. And while we might not know anything about him or his motivations for being the traitor, we also have a bit of a buffer zone, cause we don't know anything about him. And for that reason, I would rate his likelihood of being the traitor 4 UA logos out of 5, for now at least. Unfortunately, we're not going to be finding out the answer to any of this anytime soon. If the anime continues at its current pace, we're 83 chapters into the manga right now, which currently has 100 more chapters and still no reveal of a traitor. So we're probably going to have a lot of time to talk about this, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we came back to it further down the line. Though, now that I've said that, knowing my luck, the traitor will probably be revealed in the next chapter of the manga. I know that this show is personal to a lot of us and everyone's got their ideas, so let us know who you think the traitor could be. Whether it's a member of Class 1A that you think we eliminated too early, or a member of the faculty, or even somebody that we didn't even have time to mention today. Monoma. And while you're leaving your impassioned comments below, be sure to let us know of any conspiracy ideas you'd like us to take a look at in the future. Or even if you want us to take a more detailed look at any of the suspects. And of course, make sure you subscribe to Channel Frederator and click that little bell icon to join our notification squad and keep up with any traitor speculation, as well as a bunch more awesome videos from our team. And also, you should check out our Patreon, where we post behind the scenes footage, extended creator interviews, and more. Once again, I'm Jacob, and never forget, Frederator loves you.